It was a scorching summer afternoon in a small suburban town somewhere in the United States. The sun blazed over the streets, turning sidewalks into a thin, uncomfortable layer of heat that seemed to stick to everything. In the middle of the town park, a group of teenagers gathered, their laughter carrying across the empty fields. The scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the faint aroma of barbecue from nearby backyards. For these kids, it was the perfect day for mischief, the kind that would make them laugh until their sides hurt and earn them viral clout on social media. At the center of this group was Alex, 17, with a mischievous glint in his eyes. He had already convinced the others to grab cans of Coca-Cola from his backpack, their cold drinks clinking together like tiny bells in a chaotic symphony. "Watch this," he whispered, crouching slightly and squinting toward the walkway where people sometimes passed. Around him, laughter erupted as his friends fumbled with cans, ready for the prank of the day. Their plan was simple: throw the soda at random pedestrians and film their reactions. It was childish, it was reckless, and it was, to them, hilarious. Their first victim was an unsuspecting jogger. A single can arced through the air, exploding over his chest. He jumped back, dripping cola from his shirt, and cursed under his breath. The teens dissolved into uncontrollable laughter, the video on Alex's phone capturing every moment. Cheers and taunts filled the park as Morkins flew at anyone who wandered into range. By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion and the gleeful chaos. Some clapped, others shook their heads in disbelief, but the teenagers didn't care. In their world, this was pure entertainment. Then came Officer Mark. He wasn't just a police officer on routine patrol. Was a calm, measured man in his early 40s, a local hero in quiet ways that few recognized. To the teens, he looked like any other uniformed officer, a strong, steady presence but approachable. He strolled down the path, his steps deliberate, eyes scanning the park with professional awareness. Behind the seemingly casual walk lay decades of discipline, reflexes honed from years of service. Few people in town knew that officer was also a decorated Navy SEAL, a man who had faced life-and-death situations in war zones and survived through skill, training, and sheer mental toughness. To him, every situation, even a mundane park patrol, was an opportunity to observe human behavior. The moment the teens spotted him, Alex's grin widened. "Target acquired," he whispered. He raised his arm and it sailed through the air, arcing beautifully before splattering over chest. The soda hissed and dripped down the front of his uniform, the sugary smell filling the summer air. His first instinct, honed by years of high-pressure situations, was to remain calm. He didn't flinch. He didn't shout. Instead, he wiped the sticky liquid from his chest and offered a polite, almost genial smile. The teens erupted into laughter, pointing their phones and recording every second. "Did you see that? He didn't even yell," one shouted. "Man, this is hilarious," another added. They believed they had pulled off the perfect prank, but what they didn't know was that their harmless joke had just activated a storm. Inside, every SEAL-trained nerve was alert. He had the patience and restraint to appear calm, but his mind was processing every detail. The number of teens, their positions, escape routes, potential threats, and most importantly, the leader of the group. He had faced enemy combatants in hostile territories, navigating dangers far greater than a few overexcited kids with soda. Still, training kicked in. He observed, he calculated, he prepared. This was a teachable moment, and he intended to make it unforgettable. The teens, meanwhile, had no idea they were being sized up. Their laughter echoed across the park, a sound that now carried risk. "Let's see him run," Alex jeered, nudging a friend to throw another can. Remained still, calm as a lake, and that serenity unnerved them. His presence alone radiated authority, a silent warning that underestimating him could have consequences they couldn't imagine. Finally, one of the teens shouted, "Run!" and they scattered like startled birds, sprinting across the grassy fields, some veering toward the park's edge, others darting between trees. Alex led the charge, adrenaline pumping as he glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see the officer yelling or chasing, but there was nothing. That only emboldened them. "He's too slow," Alex laughed, hurling another can backward without aiming. Then moved. It wasn't a run that screamed panic or rage. It was controlled, precise, a measured acceleration born of decades of military and law enforcement training. In seconds, he closed distance faster than the teens expected. The youngest, a boy named Liam, stumbled over a tree root, falling hard onto the ground. Before he could scramble, was there, crouched just a foot away, his hand steadying the boy. "You're going to need to think about consequences," he said calmly. Liam froze, eyes wide, realizing this was no ordinary officer. The other teens began to notice the shift. Their laughter faded, replaced by apprehension. The man chasing them wasn't angry. He was focused, strategic, and terrifyingly efficient. Every step he took minimized effort and maximized control. In moments, the group of 5 was cornered near the edge of the park, the open road on one side, a chain-link fence on the other. There was no escape. Didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply stood, a wall of calm authority, and looked at the teens with piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through their bravado. "I want to hear your apologies," he said. The words were soft, almost gentle, but carried the weight of someone who had survived situations far worse than a summer prank. The teens gulped, realizing the gravity of their actions. One stammered, "We were sorry, sir." Nodded, his eyes scanning each face. He wasn't interested in humiliation, he wanted understanding. "You need to recognize your actions have consequences," he continued. "What you think is a joke can escalate quickly. You could hurt someone or yourself." He allowed a brief pause, letting the weight of his words settle in. The teens, still shaking, finally grasped the lesson. Respect isn't optional, and underestimating people can be dangerous. The sun beat down on the park, but the air was thick with tension. The prank had ended, but a far greater lesson had begun. Calm authority and disciplined presence left a mark the teens would never forget. They had laughed at someone they didn't know, and almost immediately learned the difference between casual fun and serious accountability. As the kids slowly helped him clean the mess, shared subtle hints of his past, mentioning military training, discipline, and the need for self-control, they listened in awe, each detail further amplifying the realization that this man wasn't just an officer. He was someone who had faced danger head-on and survived. By the time the cleanup was done, the laughter was gone, replaced by quiet reflection and respect. This was the beginning. That summer afternoon, a seemingly harmless prank had turned into a life-changing encounter. Didn't need force or anger to command obedience. He simply demonstrated presence, discipline, and wisdom. And as the teens walked away, drenched in sweat, cola, and a newfound understanding, none of them would ever look at authority or mischief the same way again. The park had fallen into an uneasy silence. The initial chaos of the Coca-Cola prank had evaporated, leaving only the heat of the summer sun and the palpable tension between the teens and Officer Mark. While the teenagers were still catching their breath, Mind was already analyzing the situation. His SEAL training made him a master of reading human behavior, and he could tell exactly who had thrown the first can, who had encouraged the others, and who had merely followed along. Every gesture, every twitch of a shoulder or flicker of an eye told him a story. Alex, the self-proclaimed leader, was panting, his face flushed from the sprint, yet he still tried to maintain his bravado. "It's just a joke, man. He's not mad," he whispered to his friends, glancing back toward. But Alex's words were weak, lacking conviction. Calm stance didn't match that of a man merely annoyed by a prank. There was an intensity in his gaze that made Alex's chest tighten. For a moment, the teenager wondered if he had underestimated the uniformed figure in front of him. Took a step forward, each movement deliberate and controlled. He didn't shout or raise his voice. There was no need. His body alone projected authority, discipline, precise and impossible to ignore. The teens could feel it, a subtle but unmistakable warning. He wasn't just a cop. He was someone who had trained to survive chaos, who had faced life-or-death situations and emerged victorious because he could read danger before it appeared. And now, they had inadvertently triggered that same instinct. "Sit down," instructed softly, his voice cutting through the heavy summer air like a blade. The teens froze, their eyes widening. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. Slowly, hesitantly, they sank onto the grass, their laughter replaced by nervous glances. Alex tried to maintain his composure, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins made his hands tremble slightly. In the back of his mind, he realized he had never truly considered what might happen if their joke had gone wrong. Crouched down to their level, his expression calm but piercing. "You think you're invincible, that your actions have no consequences," he began. "You're lucky I'm the kind of man who evaluates situations before reacting. Many wouldn't be so patient, but your luck doesn't last forever." His words carried weight, each syllable measured. The teens shivered, suddenly aware that the prank wasn't just an embarrassing mistake. It had placed them in a situation where respect, caution, and awareness mattered more than ever. Alex swallowed hard, realizing that everything he had laughed at just moments ago now felt absurdly trivial. We didn't mean any harm," he stammered, trying to explain away their behavior. Shook his head slowly, not in anger but in disappointment. "Intent doesn't erase impact," he said. "You think this is about soda on a uniform. It's about understanding boundaries, responsibility, and respect. You've mocked someone you didn't know, and now you're learning why that's dangerous." His tone was calm, but carried the unmistakable undertone of authority, one honed through years of military and law enforcement experience. As the teens listened, subtly shifted his stance, subtly asserting control without any aggression. In his mind, he was already preparing for every possible reaction. If they tried to run, if they resisted, if someone panicked. Each scenario had a response, measured and precise, designed to teach without unnecessary harm. This wasn't just about discipline. It was a lesson in situational awareness, in understanding the gravity of choices. Every SEAL is trained to assess, anticipate, and adapt, and applied the same principles now, calmly, quietly, in a suburban park. "You need to understand something," continued, his gaze unwavering. "In my line of work, misjudging someone can cost lives. One small mistake can escalate into disaster. Right now, your mistake could have been physical, emotional, or even legal. Luckily, we're only dealing with lessons." He paused, letting the words sink in. The teens shifted uncomfortably, realizing that their carefree fun had just brought them face to face with consequences far beyond their understanding. Alex tried to mask his fear with bravado, but it faltered under scrutiny. "I mean, he's just a guy, right?" one friend whispered. Eyes flicked to him, and with a slight nod, communicated without words that this was no ordinary man. The young teen froze, the realization hitting him like a cold wave. For the first time, they understood that they weren't just dealing with a uniform. They were dealing with someone who had trained for combat, who had mastered patience, precision, and control under pressure. Rose slightly, his movement smooth, deliberate. "I've faced real danger," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I've been in situations where hesitation costs lives. Today you tested patience. You threw soda thinking it harmless. But actions have consequences always. What's different is that I choose to teach rather than punish. You need to reflect, not just apologize." His words carried a weight that made the teens instinctively straighten their backs. They weren't just listening to an officer. They were witnessing a living lesson in discipline. Alex finally spoke, voice shaky. "Sir, we really didn't think," raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Stop explaining, start reflecting. You need to feel even just a fraction of the impact of your actions. You mocked someone you didn't know, underestimated their presence, and almost escalated the situation into something far worse. That's the lesson." The teens sat quietly, the weight of his presence pressing down on them. The heat of the summer, the sweat on their foreheads, and the lingering smell of Coca-Cola became secondary to the lesson unfolding before them. The silence stretched, each second heavy with introspection, allowed it to hang, observing every twitch, every nervous glance. Then with a subtle shift, he introduced a constructive element. "I'm not here to humiliate you," he said softly. "I'm here to guide. You will clean up the park. You will pick up the cans, the litter, the remnants of this prank. And while you work, you will reflect on what just happened." It wasn't punishment, it was accountability. The teens nodded, understanding that compliance was no longer optional. As they began picking up the cans, watched from a short distance, his presence a quiet reminder that discipline doesn't require shouting. Respect, he said quietly more to himself than to them, is earned, not demanded. The teens worked silently, each lost in thought. The air of amusement had evaporated, replaced by reflection, tension, and a dawning understanding of boundaries. For once, the park wasn't a playground, it was a classroom and was the teacher. Time passed slowly under the summer sun. The teens worked diligently, their previous bravado replaced by focused effort. Occasionally offered subtle advice, tips about responsibility, and snippets of his experience without revealing too much. His calm demeanor, combined with his understated authority, had transformed their fear into genuine curiosity and respect. By the time the cleanup was done, the teens were exhausted, sticky from sweat and soda, but transformed. They had experienced a brush with authority, unlike anything they had imagined. As they left the park that afternoon, Alex glanced back his eyes filled with awe. I didn't know, he muttered. Nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement of the lesson learned. The prank, intended as a fleeting joke, had become an unforgettable encounter, one that would linger in their minds for years. The incident wasn't about embarrassment or punishment. It was about awareness, respect, and understanding the unseen strength behind calm authority. The teens didn't laugh again that day. Instead, they walked away with a story they would never forget, a tale of misjudgment, consequences, and the quiet power of a Navy SEAL disguised as a small-town police officer. And as resumed his patrol, his calm gaze sweeping the park, he allowed himself the briefest smile. The lesson had been delivered without anger, without force, only presence, patience, and precise understanding. In his mind, he knew the teens had learned more than they realized. They had glimpsed the edge of discipline and survived, a lesson far more valuable than any viral video could convey. The park had regained a semblance of normalcy for casual, but for the group of teenagers, the chaos of their prank still pulsed in their veins. The Coca-Cola cans, now empty and scattered, lay on the ground like remnants of their reckless mischief. Alex and his friends had hoped their encounter with Officer was over, that he would simply move on and let them laugh it off. But their hope evaporated the instant moved. Calm, measured, and impossibly fast, he began pursuing them, not with rage but with controlled precision. Alex, leading the pack, felt a jolt of fear shoot through him. He had assumed the officer would react like any ordinary cop, a warning, maybe a shout, perhaps even a stern lecture. What he hadn't anticipated was the quiet, unstoppable intensity and stride. Every step was deliberate, every movement precise. It was as if he were conducting a calculated operation rather than chasing a group of teenagers in a suburban park. Alex's confidence wavered. He could feel the gap closing, and panic gnawed at the edges of his mind. The younger teens scattered in every direction, their laughter long gone, replaced by a frantic desire to escape. Liam tripped over a tree root, sprawling forward with a loud thump. Before he could even scramble to his feet was there, steadying him with calm authority. "You need to think before you act," said softly, his voice a gentle yet commanding reprimand. Liam's eyes widened, realizing that the prank they had believed harmless now carried real consequences. Every ounce of bravado he had carried moments ago dissolved under the weight of presence. Alex tried to rally the others. "Come on, split up," he shouted, desperate to regain control, but didn't panic. He had already identified the fastest runner, the one most likely to resist, and the one who would crumble first. His SEAL training allowed him to anticipate movement, predict escape routes, and neutralize potential risk without aggression. In a world outside of the park, these skills had saved lives. Here, they were being applied to teach a lesson about respect and responsibility. As the group scattered, didn't chase wildly. Instead, he moved with methodical grace, cutting off their paths, subtly guiding them toward a confined space near the park's edge and an abandoned parking lot. His presence was magnetic, his control invisible but undeniable. One by one, the teens realized that running was futile. The officer wasn't just fast, he was precise, calculated, and unyielding. Every SEAL instinct, honed over years of dangerous missions, was active. And the teens were trapped in a lesson they couldn't outrun. Alex glanced back over his shoulder, fear finally overtaking the adrenaline rush. "He's right behind us. How is he moving so fast?" he whispered to himself, breath ragged. The other teens, equally exhausted and frightened, began to slow, realizing that their reckless confidence had blinded them to reality. Their fun prank had spiraled into a high-stakes encounter with a man trained to handle far greater dangers than a few cans of soda. Finally reached Liam, the youngest of the group. His hand on the boy's shoulder was firm but calm. "Stop struggling," he said, his voice low and steady. "You can't escape the consequences of your choices." Liam's knees shook and he swallowed hard, the gravity of the moment sinking in. For the first time, he understood that what they had thought was harmless entertainment had, in fact, put them on a collision course with discipline, authority, and a man whose calmness masked lethal capability. The other teens, seeing their friend cornered, instinctively slowed and gathered near. There was no room to escape now. The park, which had once been a playground, had transformed into a controlled environment, a stage for a lesson in responsibility and respect. Eyes scanned each face, noting every flicker of fear, every twitch of nerves, every fleeting attempt to maintain bravado. In seconds, he could gauge their personalities, reactions, and capacity for reflection. "You need to understand something," began, his tone calm but firm. "This isn't about soda. This isn't about a prank. This is about understanding boundaries, accountability, and respect. You mocked someone you didn't know, someone whose patience could easily have run out. You thought this was harmless fun, but actions like this have consequences." His words were measured, each one landing with deliberate weight. The teens listened, trapped between fear and awe, realizing that the man they had mocked was far more than he seemed. Alex tried to speak. We didn't mean any," raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Intent doesn't erase impact," he said. "Your intentions were irrelevant the moment you acted. You need to understand how easily chaos can spiral and how underestimating someone can cost more than you imagine." The teens shifted uncomfortably, their previous confidence shattered. Laughter, pride, and bravado had been replaced by introspection, a stark awareness of authority, and a creeping fear of misjudgment. Allowed a brief pause, letting the silence emphasize the gravity of the moment. The sun beat down, sweat trickled down foreheads, and the lingering scent of Coca-Cola filled the air, but all of it faded compared to the presence of the officer. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't forcing them into submission. He was teaching. Through calm, measured action, he demonstrated the power of discipline and the inevitability of consequences. Finally, he gestured toward the abandoned parking lot. "You will remain here," he instructed. "Until we talk, no distractions, no escape. I want you to reflect. I want you to see that your choices matter." The teens sank to the asphalt, backs to the curb, heads lowered. Their racing hearts began to slow as the realization sank in. This was no ordinary lecture. This was a life lesson in patience, control, and respect. As they sat, paced slowly around them, maintaining a calm but authoritative presence. "In my line of work," he said almost to himself, "misjudging someone can cost lives. Hesitation, overconfidence, and disrespect are dangerous. Today you experienced a fraction of that reality." He stopped for a moment, glancing at each teen. "You need to understand that people are not what they seem. You thought you were in control, but control is earned. Respect is earned. Awareness is earned. This is your first step toward understanding that." The teens were quiet now, minds spinning. Alex's earlier bravado had crumbled completely. He could barely meet eyes, the lesson finally piercing through the arrogance and thrill-seeking of youth. The other teens exchanged nervous glances, realizing that the prank had placed them in a position they had no experience navigating: accountability. They had underestimated someone, and it had become immediately clear how costly that could have been. Hours seemed to pass as continued to walk around them, speaking in soft, measured tones. He shared glimpses of his experiences in the Navy SEALs, not to boast, but to illustrate the importance of discipline, patience, and control. "Every decision matters," he said. Every action has weight. One small mistake can escalate. Today your mistake was minor. Tomorrow it might not be. The teens listened, rapt, absorbing every word. Fear had transformed into respect and respect into reflection. By the time the afternoon shadows stretched long across the parking lot, the teens were exhausted. Sweat mixed with lingering Coca-Cola stains, and the summer sun had burned bright in their faces. But the lesson was clear, and the fear had settled into a quiet understanding. They had been tested, observed, and taught in a way no traditional authority figure could have accomplished. Calm dominance, his precision, and his unwavering presence had instilled awareness in them, a seed of respect that would grow far beyond this single encounter. Alex finally whispered, barely audible, I didn't know at all, nodded once, acknowledging the truth in those words. Now you do, he said softly. And you need to remember it. Respect, awareness, and responsibility, these aren't optional. They define how you navigate life. The teens nodded silently, absorbing the lesson. What had begun as a reckless prank had become a defining moment, an encounter with authority, discipline, and wisdom far beyond their years. And as finally allowed them to stand and walk toward the exit of the park, the teens moved slowly, each step heavy with reflection. The chase was over, but the impact of it would echo for months, even years. They had learned something more valuable than any viral video or social media thrill. Respect must be earned, choices have weight, and underestimating someone can change your life forever. The abandoned parking lot stretched in front of them, its asphalt cracked and worn, dotted with the remnants of discarded bottles and trash from years of neglect. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like fingers over the group of teenagers. Their laughter had vanished entirely, replaced by heavy breathing, uneasy glances, and an annoying sense of dread. Alex and his friends had believed their prank to be harmless, just a fleeting moment of fun. But now, faced with Officer Mark's unyielding presence, they realized the joke had escalated far beyond anything they could have imagined. Moved deliberately, his boots crunching softly against the rough pavement. He didn't run, he didn't shout, and yet his very presence radiated control. Each step seemed measured, calculated, and purposeful. The teens instinctively froze, caught in the gravitational pull of authority and discipline. They had never experienced anything like this, a calm, silent, and terrifying presence that could command compliance without a single raised voice. It was as if he had stepped out of another world, a man who had faced the unimaginable and mastered it. "Sit down," instructed firmly, his tone calm but unyielding. The words carried authority without anger, a command impossible to ignore. The teens obeyed immediately, sliding onto the asphalt as if pulled by an invisible force. Their earlier bravado had evaporated completely, replaced by fear and awe. Alex, the ringleader, sank to his knees, his chest heaving. The prank that had seemed so clever now felt foolish and reckless. They were in a space they didn't understand, under the scrutiny of a man whose experience and skill dwarfed anything they had ever encountered. Crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to their level without breaking the commanding aura. "You need to understand something fundamental," he began. "This isn't about soda. It's not about embarrassment, it's about respect, boundaries, and consequences. You mocked someone you didn't know. You underestimated a presence you couldn't see. And right now, you're witnessing the immediate consequences of that choice." His voice was calm, deliberate, and magnetic. The teens hung on every word, their minds racing to process the weight of the lesson unfolding before them. Alex tried to speak, attempting to explain their actions. We didn't mean any harm, sir." Hand rose, stopping him mid-sentence. "Intent doesn't erase impact," he said. "What you did has consequences. What you laughed at could have escalated into danger, embarrassment, or even legal trouble. You acted without foresight, without understanding, without responsibility, and that's exactly what I want you to grasp." His gaze scanned each teen in turn, silently communicating awareness and presence, piercing through their youthful bravado and exposing the reality they had ignored. The teens swallowed hard, realizing the gravity of the situation. They had assumed Officer was just a local policeman, a uniformed figure to be teased or challenged. But now they understood. He was more than that. He was a man who had trained to survive chaos, someone who had faced life-and-death scenarios in foreign lands, someone who had mastered patience, strategy, and precision. And he wasn't punishing them for their prank. He was teaching them a lesson that could shape the way they viewed responsibility and respect for the rest of their lives. Slowly circled the group, his gaze never wavering. You think authority is something to mock, to challenge, to provoke. But real authority doesn't demand attention, it earns it. You need to see that actions carry weight, choices matter, and disrespecting someone whose background you don't understand can have consequences far beyond what you imagine. The teens remained silent, mesmerized, trapped not by force but by presence. The lesson was sinking in, slowly but inexorably. Alex's friends began shifting uncomfortably. One whispered, barely audible, I didn't know he was." The words trailed off as all of them realized, collectively, the magnitude of their misjudgment. The prank had been harmless in their minds, but they had just encountered someone whose life had been shaped by precision, danger, and discipline. They were no longer just teenagers playing a joke. They were pupils in a high-stakes lesson on respect and awareness. Crouched once more, this time directly addressing Alex. "You led this," he said softly. "Leadership carries responsibility. You put your friends in a situation without considering consequences. You assumed safety where there was none. And yet, you have the opportunity to change how you lead, how you act, how you view your actions in the future." The teenager's shoulders slumped under the weight of the realization. For the first time, he understood that leadership wasn't just about bravado or influence. It was about care, judgment, and integrity. "Now," continued, rising to full height, "I could escalate this. I could take this into a place you wouldn't enjoy, but that isn't my goal. My goal is to teach. Discipline doesn't require force. Authority doesn't require aggression. But your understanding must be immediate, complete, and honest. You will clean up this park and you will reflect on your choices while doing it." The teens exchanged glances, their fear slowly transforming into cautious acceptance. They understood now that rebellion carried weight, and that compliance could be a path toward learning, not just submission. As the teens began collecting the empty soda cans, walked among them, quietly observing and offering subtle guidance. He didn't lecture constantly. Instead, he allowed the silence to speak, giving them room to reflect while maintaining a presence that was impossible to ignore. "Every choice you make leaves a mark," he said softly. "Even small actions, throwing a soda, mocking someone, create ripples. You don't see them immediately, but they exist. They shape how others perceive you, how the world responds to you, and how you perceive yourself." Alex paused mid-step, gripping a crushed can, his mind reeling. "I never thought," he muttered, nodded slightly, not breaking the rhythm of observation. "Most people don't," he said. "Most people act without foresight. Most people underestimate the unseen forces around them. Today you've glimpsed one such force, not to harm you but to teach you that preparation, awareness, and respect matter always. You have the chance to learn this lesson fully or forget it entirely. The choice is yours." The teens moved slowly, methodically picking up trash and debris, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on them. The sun sank lower, the shadows stretching across the asphalt as if to emphasize the seriousness of the moment. Continued to circulate, occasionally pointing out something overlooked or offering a quiet comment on how actions, even minor ones, could lead to consequences far beyond the moment. The lesson was seeping in, layer by layer, shaping their thoughts, their attitudes, and their awareness. By the time the park cleanup was nearly complete, the teens were sweating, exhausted, and thoughtful. The earlier adrenaline rush had given way to introspection. Alex looked up eyes wide, finally understanding the true impact of his choices. I understand now," he said quietly. "I didn't realize," nodded once, satisfied that the seed of comprehension had been planted. "Good," he said softly. "Remember this moment. Let it guide you in how you act, how you lead, and how you treat others. Respect isn't optional. Awareness isn't optional. Responsibility isn't optional. Learn it now or learn it the hard way later." As the last of the debris was collected, stepped back, allowing the teens to take in the full scope of their actions. The park was restored, but the lesson had left a mark far more permanent than any cleanup could erase. The prank had been transformed into a powerful educational experience, one that none of the teens would ever forget. They had come expecting laughter, thrill, and a viral moment. Instead, they received something far more valuable, a first-hand lesson in authority, respect, and consequence from a man who had mastered life-and-death discipline in ways they could scarcely imagine. The sun began to dip behind the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the asphalt. The teens, now silent and reflective, gathered themselves, feeling both relief and reverence. They had survived the confrontation, not through rebellion or resistance, but through observation, compliance, and reflection. And in that survival lay the true lesson. Didn't need force. He didn't need to raise his voice. His calm authority, honed over decades, had communicated more than words ever could. Finally, addressed them one last time. "This ends now," he said, voice steady. "Carry what you've learned. Let it shape your actions, your decisions, and your understanding of the world. You've had a glimpse of discipline, focus, and authority. Don't waste it." And with that, he allowed them to leave, their footsteps lighter but their minds far heavier, carrying with them the weight of lessons that would echo far longer than the prank that had brought them here. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, painting the abandoned parking lot in hues of orange and gold. The teenagers, sweaty and sticky from the soda, had finally completed the cleanup. Each can picked up a small but tangible symbol of their reckoning. The laughter and bravado that had filled the park only hours before were gone, replaced by a heavy silence that carried both exhaustion and introspection. They had not only faced the consequences of a prank, but had been thrust into a lesson in discipline, accountability, and respect, one delivered with the precision of a Navy SEAL. Officer Mark observed quietly, his presence commanding without a word. The teens' hands trembled slightly as they stacked the last cans and bags of trash. Their eyes, once bright with mischief, now held something deeper, a mixture of awe, fear, and understanding. Sensing their attention, began to speak, not as a teacher scolding students, but as a mentor guiding fledgling minds through the weight of their actions. "You've completed the task," he said softly, his voice carrying the calm authority that had dominated their day. "But the cleanup is only the beginning. What matters most is the lesson you carry forward." Alex, the ringleader, shifted uncomfortably. He had prided himself on cleverness, charm, and daring, yet here he sat stripped of those defenses. "Sir, I didn't know," he began, voice trailing off. Nodded, letting him find his own words. "Most people don't," he said. "Most people act without foresight. They underestimate situations, misjudge authority, and assume consequences will be minor. Today, you've experienced the reality that comes from overconfidence and ignorance. It's a small lesson now, but one that can guide you for life if you pay attention." The group listened intently, the weight of presence embedding itself in their minds. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to punish. Each word, each pause, each glance carried authority refined through years of military and law enforcement experience. Had been trained to act decisively under pressure, to evaluate situations, to anticipate behavior, and to instill respect through action rather than fear. And now, in this suburban park, he was teaching the same principles to teenagers who had learned too late the cost of. "You mocked someone you didn't know," continued. "You acted without consideration, and yet you were fortunate. Many times people are not as patient. Many times misjudgment leads to consequences far more severe than cleaning a few cans or feeling embarrassed. What you need to understand is this: respect is not a suggestion. Responsibility is not optional. Awareness is not negotiable." His gaze swept across their faces, each teenager meeting his eyes for the first time with genuine humility. The teens shifted, the weight of realization pressing down on them. For the first time, they saw beyond the surface of authority, beyond the uniform, beyond the prank. They glimpsed the man behind the badge, a disciplined, trained individual who had faced chaos, danger, and life-or-death scenarios. And they recognized, with a clarity that left them momentarily breathless, that their actions had been reckless and unconsidered. Laughter had given way to reflection. Bravado had dissolved into understanding. Crouched slightly, leaning in to address them more personally. Leadership, influence, and action carry weight, he said, directing his attention primarily to Alex. You led this group. You inspired them to act recklessly. Leadership is not about bravado or thrill. It's about responsibility, foresight, and understanding consequences. You have the opportunity to learn how to lead well, how to act wisely, how to influence without harm. Today, you've seen the other side of choice. Use it wisely. Alex swallowed hard, nodding slowly. I didn't think it would go this far, he admitted. Calm gaze never wavered. Most people don't, he replied. But thinking ahead, anticipating results, understanding the impact of actions, that is what separates maturity from immaturity. That is what separates success from failure. And that is what separates those who thrive in life from those who stumble because they underestimated reality. The other teens exchanged glances, each silently acknowledging their own role in the prank and their lack of foresight. Liam, the youngest, spoke softly. I thought it was funny, I didn't think about anything else. Nodded, placing a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. That's why reflection matters. Fun without thought can lead to regret. Awareness protects you, guides you, and teaches you how to act responsibly. This lesson isn't punishment, it's preparation. You've been given a glimpse of what discipline looks like, of what control and presence mean. Learn from it. Allowed a pause, letting the teenagers absorb the weight of his words. Then he began sharing subtle insights from his own experiences, carefully chosen to resonate without overwhelming. In the Navy SEALs, he said quietly, we are trained to anticipate, to adapt, and to respect every factor in an environment. A single miscalculation can mean the difference between life and death. Discipline isn't about fear, it's about preparation. Awareness isn't about paranoia, it's about survival. And respect isn't about obligation. It's about understanding the consequences of your actions and how they ripple through the lives of others. The teens listened in awe. They had expected a scolding, perhaps even laughter or anger. What they received instead was a lesson in perspective, responsibility, and real-world consequences. Words were more powerful than punishment, more memorable than embarrassment. He had demonstrated the strength of calm authority, the power of discipline, and the profound impact of reflection. And the teens, for the first time, understood that their prank had been far more serious than they had imagined. Alex wiped his hands on his shorts, feeling sticky from the soda, but his mind was focused on a new realization. I get it now, he said quietly. It's not just about what we do, it's about understanding the impact on others and thinking before acting. Nodded, a slight but approving smile breaking his otherwise calm demeanor. Exactly. You've experienced firsthand how quickly fun can turn into chaos. And you've learned that leadership and responsibility are inseparable from respect and awareness. The sun dipped lower and the parking lot was bathed in warm, fatting light. The teens, once careless and brash, now moved slowly, deliberately, each action measured by reflection. Stood back, observing silently. He had delivered the lesson not through force, not through anger, but through presence, patience, and example. The teens had cleaned up the physical mess, but more importantly, they had begun to clean up the mental and emotional recklessness that had led them here. Remember this, said finally, his voice calm but firm. What you experience today isn't just about a prank. It's about choices, actions, consequences, and understanding the unseen weight of authority. You've glimpsed discipline, patience, and control. Carry it forward, share it. Learn from it. Don't waste this moment. It's rare to have such a direct encounter with consequences that are immediate but instructive. Learn it fully, or life will teach you in harsher ways later. The teenagers nodded, some silently, some with whispered acknowledgments. They felt transformed, not entirely, but in a way that could grow over time. They had faced accountability without humiliation, guidance without aggression, and a profound lesson in respect that would echo far beyond this summer day. A presence had left a mark, invisible but indelible, in the minds of these young individuals who had once thought themselves invincible. By the time the teens began to leave the parking lot, the sun had nearly set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Their movements were slower, more deliberate, and their conversations quieter, reflective. Alex glanced back at, eyes wide with newfound understanding. "Thank you, sir," he said softly. Nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of a lesson successfully delivered. The prank, the chaos, the fear, it had all become a catalyst for growth. And as resumed his patrol, the soft crunch of his boots echoing across the lot, he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The teens had begun to learn, to reflect, to transform. What started as a harmless joke had become a defining moment, a lesson in awareness, responsibility, and respect that would follow them long after the sun had set. The sun had fully set, and the warm glow of twilight replaced the harsh brightness of day. The small suburban park was quiet again, the remnants of the prank now entirely cleaned, leaving only traces of the lesson embedded in the minds of the teenagers. Alex and his friends walked slowly toward their bikes and the nearby bus stop, each step weighted with thought. The adrenaline of the chase and confrontation had faded, replaced by a contemplative silence that none of them had anticipated. This wasn't just a lesson in discipline, it was a profound moment of personal growth. Alex, leading the group, felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. His earlier thrill and sense of invincibility had evaporated, replaced by a humbling awareness of responsibility. He replayed every moment of the day in his mind, the first throne, the sudden stillness in gaze, the chase, and the confrontation in the parking lot. Each memory was a reminder that his actions, no matter how trivial they seemed, carried consequences. For the first time, Alex truly understood the weight of influence, how his choices affected not just himself but everyone around him. Liam, still sticky from soda and sweat, walked beside him, his eyes cast downward. I never realized," he murmured quietly, as if speaking the truth aloud would make it more real. Alex glanced at him, recognizing the same mixture of fear, awe, and reflection in his friend's face. "Yeah," he replied softly. "It's not just about fun. It's about thinking, about knowing what you're getting into and who you're dealing with." For the first time, the teens weren't talking about the prank. They were discussing accountability, foresight, and the unseen impact of their actions. Words continued to echo in their minds. Respect is earned. Awareness is essential. Responsibility is not optional. Each phrase carried the weight of someone who had lived through danger, someone whose discipline was born from experience and necessity, not fear. The teens had witnessed calm authority, precision, and measured control, and they had realized, perhaps for the first time, how far their own had taken them. Alex's thoughts returned to the moment had circled them in the parking lot. He remembered the officer's calm assessment, the subtle corrections, and the way every glance seemed to anticipate their next move. It was almost as if could read their minds, predicting behavior before it happened. The fear he had initially felt now transformed into respect, a respect born not of intimidation, but of realization. He had been confronted by someone who understood discipline, responsibility, and consequence in ways far beyond teenage comprehension. The group reached the edge of the park, where their bikes and scattered belongings waited. For a moment they paused, still reluctant to leave the lessons behind. Alex looked at his friends, noting how each of them had visibly changed in the hours since the prank. Their laughter, once brash and carefree, had been replaced by thoughtful quiet. Their gestures, once exaggerated and careless, were now measured. Even the youngest, Liam, walked with a newfound awareness, as if every step mattered in ways he had never considered. "What do you think he'll remember?" one of the teens asked softly, breaking the silence. "About us, I mean." Alex considered the question. "I think he'll remember we learned, and that's what matters. He didn't punish us to humiliate us. He did it to teach. That's more than most people do." Liam nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess we really did almost mess up big time," he admitted. "I didn't see it until he made me stop and think." The reflection continued as they mounted their bikes and began the slow ride home. The streets were quiet, the evening air cool against their sweat-soaked faces. Each teen was lost in their own thoughts, replaying words, the chase, and the lessons in respect and responsibility. Alex realized that leadership was not about daring pranks or impressing friends. It was about accountability, foresight, and understanding the impact of actions on others. Every choice mattered, and every decision could have consequences far beyond their initial perception. By the time they reached their neighborhood, the teens had begun to silently discuss how they could apply these lessons in the future. "We need to be more careful," Alex said, voice thoughtful. "Not just with pranks, but with everything. What we do matters." Liam nodded. "Yeah, I never thought about that before. I just acted." Another friend added, "I guess we really have to think before we act. No more doing stuff just because it seems funny." The conversation was quiet but earnest, the beginnings of transformation taking root in each of them. They had faced fear, been confronted by authority, and witnessed the precision and calm of someone who had mastered discipline. And now, they understood that their behavior, choices, and leadership could have lasting effects, not just on themselves, but on those around them. They were beginning to internalize the principles had demonstrated: respect, awareness, and responsibility. That evening, Alex reflected alone in his room. He thought about the prank, the chase, and calm authority. He realized how close they had come to true consequences, how a seemingly trivial joke had escalated into a real-life test of discipline and reflection. He understood, finally, that leadership was more than taking risks or inspiring friends. It was about foresight, accountability, and guiding others with care. The lessons of the day were no longer abstract. They were real, tangible, and unforgettable. Across town, Liam replayed the events in his own mind. He could still feel the firm but calm pressure of hand on his shoulder. He could still hear the words about awareness and responsibility echoing in his ears. For the first time, he understood that thoughtless actions carried weight beyond immediate consequences. That prank had been a turning point, a moment that would shape how he approached decisions, friends, and life itself. Over the following days, the teens began to carry these lessons into their everyday lives. Alex found himself thinking twice before making jokes, considering not only his own enjoyment, but also how others might perceive or be affected by his actions. Liam began noticing small details in his environment, practicing awareness and patience in ways he had never done before. Even the others, who initially seemed less affected, started demonstrating subtle changes. A pause before speaking, a careful choice in behavior, and a newfound respect for authority and consequence. Lesson had transcended the moment of confrontation. It wasn't just about the prank or the chase. It was about instilling a deeper understanding of personal responsibility, awareness, and respect for others. The teens had not only survived the encounter, they had been given a gift: the ability to see beyond immediate gratification, to consider consequences, and to value discipline and foresight. Weeks later, the group of teenagers would recount the incident to friends and family, but not as a story of embarrassment or fear. They told it as a story of transformation, of a lesson learned under extraordinary circumstances. The prank that had once seemed so important now appeared trivial in comparison to the insights they had gained. Calm authority, his measured actions, and his words of wisdom had left an indelible mark, shaping the way they viewed themselves and the world around them. By the end of the summer, the teens had begun to demonstrate real change. They approached interactions with more thoughtfulness, recognized the importance of consequences, and carried themselves with a quiet confidence that came not from bravado, but from awareness and reflection. What had begun as a careless prank had evolved into a profound lesson in personal growth, responsibility, and the true meaning of respect. The days after the park incident passed with an unusual quietness in Alex and his friends' lives. Gone was the unbridled bravado, replaced by a thoughtful silence that followed them like a shadow. Each morning, as they walked to school or hung out in their neighborhood, they were reminded of words: respect is earned, awareness is essential, responsibility is not optional. The lesson had not been superficial. It had taken root in their minds, shaping their actions and altering the way they saw the world. At school, Alex noticed subtle changes in how he interacted with classmates. He had previously been the ringleader of jokes, the instigator of pranks, and the one whose influence was often unchecked. But now he approached each interaction with thoughtfulness, considering the potential impact of his words and actions. When a group of students attempted to throw another prank, Alex hesitated, thinking through the consequences before stepping in. "Let's not," he said quietly, surprising even himself. His friends followed, realizing the gravity of the lesson they had learned at the park. Liam and the younger teens also began demonstrating a newfound awareness. They noticed details in their environment, observed the reactions of others, and considered the potential outcomes before acting. Small changes, holding the door for someone, waiting their turn, speaking with respect, marked a noticeable shift in behavior. Even their teachers began to comment on their improved attentiveness and calm demeanor. It wasn't just discipline for the sake of discipline. It was a genuine understanding that every action had a ripple effect and every choice mattered. The teens' transformation did not go unnoticed in the wider community. Parents, neighbors, and peers who had witnessed their earlier recklessness began to see subtle changes in their demeanor. Alex, once loud and brash, now spoke with measured confidence. Liam, previously impulsive, now paused before acting, thoughtfully weighing the consequences. Even their friends who had not been directly involved in the park incident observed a shift in leadership, awareness, and responsibility. Word spread that the group had been involved in an encounter with Officer, and soon the story took on a life of its own, one of respect earned, not mischief remembered. One afternoon, the group returned to the same park, not as pranksters but as volunteers. The benches had been repainted, the paths cleared of debris, and small plants lined the edges of the park. Coincidentally, on patrol, noticed them and approached. His calm presence remained unchanged, but a hint of satisfaction lingered in his expression. "I see you've taken responsibility beyond words," he remarked, his tone quiet but approving. The teens nodded, slightly embarrassed but proud of their efforts. They were beginning to understand that actions, not intentions, defined character. Alex spoke first, voice steady but respectful. "We wanted to make up for the chaos we caused. We know it's not enough to just say sorry, so we're fixing what we broke and trying to do better." Studied him for a moment, eyes sharp yet kind. "Actions speak louder than words," he said. "You're beginning to learn that. But remember, consistency matters. One good action doesn't erase a pattern of poor choices. The true test is in making responsibility habitual, in living the lessons every day." The group nodded, taking the words seriously. Over the next several weeks, they returned to the park multiple times, volunteering in small ways, picking up litter, maintaining flower beds, and even organizing small community events. Each visit was a reminder of their transformation, a physical manifestation of the internal changes that had begun after their encounter with. They were no longer defined by a reckless prank, but by deliberate action, thoughtfulness, and respect for others. Their transformation also affected their peer group. Friends who had once encouraged mischief began to reconsider their own behavior, inspired by the visible growth in Alex and his friends. They saw firsthand that respect could be earned, and that awareness and responsibility were not just abstract concepts. They were observable traits that shaped how others perceived and trusted them. Slowly, a small ripple of change began to spread through the community, demonstrating that even one incident, handled wisely, could have far-reaching consequences. Occasionally checked on their progress, never overbearing but present enough to ensure the lessons were internalized. He offered subtle guidance and encouragement, praising improvements while reinforcing the importance of accountability. "Change isn't a moment," he said one day. "It's a habit. It's about seeing beyond yourself, considering consequences, and acting deliberately. The park is clean, but the real work is internal. Keep that work alive, and you'll be prepared for anything life throws at you." One Saturday, the teens organized a small community cleanup event, inviting younger students to help. Alex and his friends led by example, demonstrating the importance of diligence, respect, and teamwork. Their peers observed the effort, some initially skeptical, others inspired by the visible commitment and discipline. Present as a quiet observer, watched with approval. The teens had not only learned the lesson, they were beginning to teach it, showing that true growth involved extending responsibility beyond oneself. As they worked, Alex reflected on the journey that had begun with a careless prank. The encounter with had been more than a lesson in discipline, it had been a turning point. He had learned that leadership required more than charisma and influence. It demanded foresight, responsibility, and respect for others. He understood now that pranks, jokes, and impulsive actions carried consequences, sometimes immediate, sometimes delayed, but always real. The transformation was no longer theoretical. It was visible, tangible, and powerful. By the end of the summer, the teens had achieved a remarkable level of personal growth. Their behavior, once reckless and thoughtless, had become measured and conscientious. They were no longer just reacting. They were observing, considering, and acting with purpose. Their peers and community members noticed the change, offering praise, encouragement, and even trust in ways that had been previously absent. The lessons from had transcended the prank, shaping character and perspective in a way that would resonate far into the future. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the park was bathed in golden light, approached the teens once more. "You've done well," he said quietly. "Not because of this cleanup, but because you've begun to internalize the lessons. Awareness, responsibility, respect, these are not just words. They are tools that guide life. Keep using them, keep living them." Alex and his friends nodded, understanding that the journey was ongoing. Growth, reflection, and responsibility were not a single act. They were a continuous path. For the first time since the prank, Alex smiled genuinely. "Thank you, sir," he said, sincerity in his voice. Expression softened slightly, a rare smile appearing. "You've earned it," he replied. "Not for words, not for intentions, but for actions and reflection. Keep earning it every day." The teens left the park that evening with more than pride. They left with understanding, awareness, and a foundation for future leadership and respect. The summer had waned, leaving behind the lingering warmth of early autumn and the crisp hint of change in the air. Alex, Liam, and their friends walked through the park one last time before school started, the area immaculate and vibrant. Flowers planted by volunteers swayed gently in the breeze, benches gleamed with freshly applied paint, and trash bins, once overflowing, now stood ready for thoughtful use. The park was no longer just a playground for careless pranks. It had become a symbol of transformation, discipline, and responsibility. Alex paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath. He remembered the day the Coca-Cola cans flew, the reckless laughter, and the initial thrill of defying authority. The memory was vivid, but it felt almost unreal, as if a different person had acted so thoughtlessly. The chase, the confrontation, and the lessons imparted by Officer Mark had reshaped their understanding of consequence and leadership. That single afternoon had marked the beginning of a profound internal shift. Liam, walking beside him, ran a hand over one of the newly planted flower beds. "I still can't believe how much changed in just a few weeks," he said softly. Alex nodded. "It wasn't just the cleanup," he replied. "It was everything," seeing him, understanding what he meant, realizing that our actions affect more than just us. "I feel different now, like I can't go back to the way I was." Their friends chimed in, sharing similar reflections. One remarked how he now paused before acting, considering potential consequences. Another spoke of how he tried to influence friends positively instead of encouraging reckless behavior. Each teen, in their own way, had internalized the principles had demonstrated: awareness, responsibility, respect, and leadership. They weren't just lessons learned. They were habits forming, traits being integrated into their very character. As they approached, the center of the park appeared, standing quietly by the benches. His presence was calm, composed, and commanding, yet somehow reassuring. He greeted them with a nod, his piercing eyes reflecting the subtle approval of someone who had witnessed growth firsthand. "You've done well," he said quietly, voice steady as ever. "Not because of these flowers or the cleanliness of the park, but because you've transformed your approach to life, choices, and leadership. That is the mark of true progress." Alex stepped forward, voice steady but respectful. "Sir, we can't thank you enough. I mean, I thought it was just a prank, something silly, but you showed us something real, something that actually matters. Nodded, letting the weight of the moment settle. Most lessons in life are subtle, he said. Some are harsh, others quiet. Today you experience both clarity and consequence. Remember that growth isn't a single act. It's a series of choices made consistently, thoughtfully, and with awareness. That is how character is built. The group listened intently as shared a few final reflections, drawn from his years of experience in high-pressure environments. In the SEALs, he began, we train constantly to be aware of everything around us, to anticipate outcomes, and to respect every variable in a situation. Life outside the military is no different. Your environment, your peers, your decisions, they all matter. Every choice has weight. Every action leaves a mark. Today, you've learned that firsthand. Use it. Protect it. Live it. Alex felt a surge of understanding, the full magnitude of a lesson settling into his consciousness. It wasn't merely about avoiding pranks or following rules. It was about perceiving the world through the lens of awareness, responsibility, and respect. It was about leading with foresight, thinking beyond immediate gratification, and understanding the consequences of one's actions on others. The prank had been a catalyst, but the transformation was the real story. Liam, observing the serene environment, whispered, I think I finally get it. It's not about being scared or punished, it's about knowing better, being better. Eyes softened slightly, acknowledging the depth of the statement. Exactly, he said. Fear can enforce compliance, but understanding enforces wisdom. You've been given a glimpse of responsibility, and it's up to you to carry it forward. Your choices now define who you are and how you influence those around you. The teens walked slowly through the park, taking in the flowers, the benches, and the clear pathways. Each step seemed deliberate, reflective, and symbolic. Where chaos had once reigned, discipline now guided. Where thoughtlessness had once prevailed, awareness had taken root. They understood now that transformation was not instantaneous, but it was tangible, observable, and actionable. The park, once a stage for mischief, had become a living monument to growth and redemption. Over the following weeks, the teens began sharing their experiences with peers, family, and even younger students in the community. The story of the Coca-Cola prank evolved from one of embarrassment and recklessness to one of accountability and personal development. Alex and his friends encouraged others to consider their actions, to think before acting, and to respect authority and peers alike. Influence rippled outward, not through force, but through example and mentorship. Teachers, neighbors, and parents noticed the remarkable transformation. Alex, once known for instigating mischief, became a model of thoughtful leadership. Liam, once impulsive, displayed patience and awareness in interactions with peers. The other teens mirrored these qualities, each incorporating responsibility, reflection, and respect into daily life. The community, once focused on the prank itself, now celebrated the growth and maturity it had inspired. What had begun as a moment of recklessness became a testament to human potential when guidance, mentorship, and reflection intersect. One crisp autumn evening, the group returned to the park one last time before the school year began. Greeted them quietly, a rare smile tugging at his lips. I've watched your progress, he said. You've taken lessons from a single moment and allowed them to guide your actions consistently. That is rare and it is commendable. Your growth isn't finished. It never is. But you've demonstrated that understanding, awareness, and respect are choices you can make every day. Alex stepped forward, a sense of pride and humility in his stance. Sir, we really have learned. We understand now that it's not just about avoiding trouble, it's about becoming better people, thinking ahead and treating others with respect. We'll keep trying every day. Nodded, eyes sharp yet approving. Good, he said. Remember, life will continue to test you. There will be moments when the easy path is tempting, when impulsiveness feels safer, when pride overshadows thought. Remember this summer, this park, this lesson. Choose wisely and you'll continue to grow. The teens lingered for a few moments, absorbing the atmosphere of the park, the calm authority of and the weight of the lessons imparted. They realized the depth of transformation they had. Where fear had initially driven compliance, understanding now drove choice. Where intimidation had initially commanded attention, respect now guided behavior. And where recklessness had once ruled, responsibility and awareness now prevailed. As they finally left the park, their steps measured but confident, Alex looked back one last time. The area gleamed under the soft light of the setting sun, a symbol of their own internal transformation. Standing quietly by the benches, nodded in acknowledgement. The teens understood that the park would always hold memories of the prank, the chase, and the confrontation. But more importantly, it held the memory of growth, reflection, and the powerful impact of disciplined mentorship. In the months and years that followed, Alex, Liam, and their friends carried the lessons of that summer into every aspect of their lives. They approached challenges with awareness, led with responsibility, and interacted with others with genuine respect. Influence became an enduring example of how calm authority, experience, and mentorship could inspire transformation. The Coca-Cola prank, once a moment of reckless fun, had become the catalyst for a profound journey of self-discovery, accountability, and maturity. And in the quiet moments when the teens reflected on the park, the chase, and the calm, unwavering presence of Officer Mark, they realized the truth of his most important lesson. Choices matter, respect is earned, and awareness transforms lives. The prank was gone, but the impact remained, shaping their character, their decisions, and the way they approached the world, forever.